Hello there, welcome back to my channel. My name is Evan Cole, and today I have for us another Worlds format tier list. This time I will be ranking all of the decks in the Worlds 2006 format. 2006 is Hidden Legends through Holland Phantoms and is absolutely one of my favorite formats I have ever played. This format is incredibly diverse, with tons of different decks available. Lots of variety, both in terms of decks that are really strong and decks that are a bit less strong, but are still a lot of fun. So I'm very excited to talk about one of my favorite and I think most interesting metagames out there. Now, before I start this ranking, I want to just briefly mention the relationship between 2006 and RS to PK. So RS to PK is Ruby and Sapphire through Power Keepers. It is every single expansion in the Gen 3 era of the Pokemon TCG. Now, this is a format that has exploded in popularity in the last half decade, and at this point in time, it is far and away the most played of the Gen 3 EX era formats. At the start of people playing RS to PK, a lot of folks took 06 decks and then modified them a little bit. It started out feeling like it was 06 with a few extra cards added, mainly cards like Cessation Crystal from Crystal Guardians. However, as time has gone on, I do feel like these formats have diverged quite a bit. And so while I admit that at the start of RS to PK's popularity, I didn't see much of a reason to play it over 06. At this point, these formats are incredibly different, and I would recommend anyone who does enjoy playing 2006 should try out RS to PK. And on the flip side, if you are someone who really enjoys RS to PK, I recommend trying out 2006. Although some of these names may be familiar to you if you are an RS to PK player, some of the ways that these decks are played vary extremely compared to RS to PK, as well as getting to see some Pokemon succeed in 2006 that may not do so well in RS to PK. So I am focusing on the 2006 Worlds format, and with this tier list, I will mainly be ranking these decks based on how well I think they would perform in a tournament. Now, you will see here that I have 7 tiers this time. Starting at the bottom with F tier, these are decks that I don't think you should ever play, period. There will be 1 or 2 F tier decks this time. These are decks that I just don't really see a reason to ever play. D tier is decks that I don't recommend playing in a tournament, but that I do think are interesting enough to play casually, and perhaps with a little bit of luck and the right list or the right pilot could succeed in a tournament, but it's not a deck that I would ever recommend playing. In the C tier, we have decks that are good enough to play in a tournament, but that's a bit conditional. These are decks that I wouldn't really expect to ever win a tournament, and I feel like top 8 is probably the highest they could get. But if you did play these in an 06 tournament, I wouldn't immediately look at your deck choice and think that you have no shot. Once we get to the B tier, we now start to see decks that are pretty good. These are decks that absolutely are capable of winning tournaments. Top 8 is probably what you would expect to see out of them. These decks typically have some sort of flaw that prevents them from reaching higher tiers than B. Typically, you struggle with 1 or more matchups above the B tier in order to be stuck in B, but these are decks that you can absolutely succeed with in a tournament. In the A tier, we've got great decks. These are decks that could easily win a tournament, could definitely make top 8, phenomenal choices for the 2006 metagame. And then lastly, we've got S and double S. There is one deck in this format that I think rises far and above the rest of the metagame and lands itself in the double S tier. In the 06 metagame, we typically talk about a big 3. There are 3 decks that are just a bit above everything else and belong in the S tier. But even in that big 3, there's one deck that just rises above all else and is the first double S deck I've ever ranked on this channel. Stick around to find out what that deck might be. Once again, this is for tournament play. If you're playing casually, I cannot recommend enough that you pick up any of these decks and try it out. The 2006 format is still phenomenal to this day, and you will end up getting some amazing games out of it. So, without further ado, let's get started. So the first deck that I have on the list is Arcanine. So Arcanine EX is a heavily statted Pokemon, this card is just efficient and big. Stage 1, high HP. Overrun is just a very nice, quick attack, 30 damage plus 20 to a bench Pokemon. It's a card that can really add up. And then Flame Swirl can do crazy amounts of damage. And by playing React Energy, you have very little downside. Arcanine EX also has the benefit of getting to play with cards like Houndoom. Because the deck only attacks with Arcanine, you can keep a really low bench and use Houndoom to trainer lock your opponent as well. Arcanine is a great deck. I think it's a deck that has seen a lot of interest in the last few years. People are looking at this format, they're looking at Arcanine and seeing something there that maybe was missed during the 2006 format. There are quite a few people I know who would list Arcanine perhaps in the A tier. This deck just has really nice numbers and is a big pain to deal with. It avoids Battle Frontier, which is a big benefit. And in fact, it's able to play Battle Frontier as well, and it can lock in a Battle Frontier with Houndoom. The deck also has access to Cursed Stone, since it does not rely on Pokepowers, and it just is a very efficient Pokemon. I kind of bounce back and forth between having it in A tier or B tier. I think Arcanine has some matchups that are incredibly solid, and it has some matchups that give it a really hard time. If Arcanine can draw its cards and play well from there, then it can do very, very well. However, that does feel easier said than done sometimes, and Arcanine is one of those decks that can run out of gas as time goes on. We're still trying to figure out the right way to play it, whether to use the turn 2 engine where you play Soup Teleporter with Jirachi from Deoxys, or Lunatone from Legend Maker in order to use Moon Guidance, or whether you should just play 4 Growlithe and 4 Arcanine, and then maybe a 2-2 Houndoom, and those are the only Pokemon in your deck. So this is one that could really go back and forth. I think for now I'm going to put it in the high B tier, but Arcanine is a very interesting deck and one that should be looked at more as we continue to think about the 2006 metagame. Next up on our list is going to be Dragtrode. So here I have it represented with Dragonite, Dark Dragonite from Team Rocket returns. Dragtrode is an incredible deck utilizing the power of Dark Trance from Dragonite to move your Dark Energy around, Darkness Navigation from Dark Electrode to actually search your deck for energy and attach it to Electrode, which you can then move with the Dragonite, and then, of course, getting to deal insane amounts of damage with Rocket Sneasel EX. I love this deck, and I think it is incredibly powerful. Dragtrode is definitely one of the big 3 in 2006. I'm going to put it in the S tier. Rocket Sneasel EX just does ridiculous amounts of damage with Dark Ring, and Drag Off is an incredibly disruptive attack that can really put pressure on your opponent from the get-go. Although the deck is susceptible to Battle Frontier, you get to play Desert Ruins because your Sneasel only has 90 HP, which is a phenomenal counter stadium to have access to when stadiums like Battle Frontier and Cursed Stone can do a lot of work against a deck like Dragtrode. We saw Andrew Mahone won the 2006 side event held at Indianapolis, at least the day 1 side events. More to that in a little bit. So seeing him win the 33-person event with Dragtrode continues to demonstrate that even to this day, Dragtrode is still a phenomenal deck. By the way, so the Indy Regionals 2024 side event, I should specify, so this happened in May of 2024. There were 2 different tournaments that were held. One of them was on Friday, the other was on Sunday. And I will be referring to this tournament in both settings as we talk about this metagame. The other main modern 2006 tournament that we have had recently was the tournament that was held at NAIC 2018. I believe we had 50 people show up to this tournament, more give or take a little bit. It was hosted by Jonathan Paranata. It was an incredible event. I had so much fun attending that, as well as getting to attend the Indianapolis Regionals tournaments as well. And I hope that we do get to have some more in-person, high-stakes 2006 tournaments in the future. Ross Coffin got 2nd place at the NEIC 2018 tournament with Dragtrode. So even more proof this deck is phenomenal. With that said, Dragtrode is definitely a deck that you would want to play in one of these tournaments and that you should look out for. S tier for sure. Let's do Flariados. So Flariados is a deck that combines Ariados from Unseen Forces and Flareon EX with its Evolutionary Flame. This deck is deceptively complicated. On the surface, it looks like all you're going to do is evolve into Flareon, burn and confuse your opponent, and then use Ariados's reactive poison to do 10 plus 30 for each special condition. Bam, 1 energy, 70 damage, you're off and running. And while this is definitely one of the assets of Flariados, this deck has a lot more up its sleeve than it seems. Flariados is a deck that I have been working on most recently. It's kind of the 06 deck I've put the most thought into over the last few months, and I do think it is actually pretty solid. The main attack I have found myself using is Spider Trap to continuously drag up opponents' bench sitters and poison them and put them to sleep. Does a lot of work in disrupting your opponent and playing this nice long game while you set things up and establish your lock. I've been trying out a list that plays POW Hand Extension as well as MEWX to have sort of this pseudo control variant, this play from behind, control the board while you start to bash away, and it's worked out really well so far. If you are an RS to PK player and you hear the name Flariados, this deck is a bit of a meme in RS to PK. It's not a great deck in that format. However, RS to PK has a lot more that is going against Flariados than we do in 2006. Flariados is a deck that can play Battle Frontier, and so that already makes it pretty solid in this metagame. There's no Cess Crystal, you have to remember that. And I think against the top decks, it does really well. Flariados is a solid LBS matchup, and it does pretty well against Bombtar. So with that, I think Flariados is a B tier deck. I'd put it in the high B tier. I almost wanted to put it in A tier, but I think that would be a bit too biased on my end. So I'm going to put Flariados in the B tier, but I will tell you, if you have heard of this deck but maybe wrote it off, give Flariados a try. I think you will really enjoy it. I've had so much fun playing it, and it's just a nice, solid deck. We saw someone go 3-0 with Flariados at the NAIC 2018 tournament before they had to drop the event. That, I think, was one of the last times we've ever seen Flariados be played in a tournament, but give it a try. I think it's really great. Okay, next up here we have Banette Medicham. So there are two main Medicham variants in the 2006 format. Of course, Medicham EX is a terror in the 2005 format with its Wise Aura Pokebody to shut off all Poke Powers from non-EX Pokemon. Now, in 2006, the metagame shifted a little bit. The main thing is that many of the relevant Poke Powers in 2006 are based from EX Pokemon. A big one in particular is Blastoise EX with Energy Rain. You're not shutting that off. And so if you are a Medicham player, you need to have ways of getting around these decks that can just push through a Medicham or are uninhibited by the Wise Aura Pokebody, and one of the proposed partners to Medicham is Banette EX from Legend Maker. So we actually saw Michael Pramalot play Medicham Banette 2 Worlds in 2006, where he ended up making top 32. This is, I think, the only successful finish the deck had ever had, but a top 32 finish at this Worlds is incredible because this World Championships was stacked. It is one of the most stacked top 32s of any tournament you will ever see in your life. Maybe that's a video that I should make some other time, but I'll tell you what, every name you've ever heard of was in that tournament, and that top 32 is no different. Banette Medicham as a deck, it's okay. I like Banette EX as a Pokemon. It is an incredibly strong card. The problem with Banette in the 2006 metagame is just that I don't even know how to describe it. It's just not exactly enough. Dragtrode pushes over Banette like nothing, and LBS can also do a really good job of just one-shotting Banettes over and over again. And like I said, LBS doesn't care about Medicham EX either, so that matchup's a little bit tough for you. Again, Banette is just a very nice, efficient attacker, and Medicham is also really strong, but together, I don't really see the two as being any better than the C tier. It's kind of a meme right now. Like, people refer to Banette Medicham as one of the worst decks to ever make a top 32 at a Worlds, but I do think you could play it. We've seen people play it in these modern tournaments. I think at NAIC 2018, we had someone go, I think, 3-3 with Banette Medicham, so it's not an amazing deck. It's not an awful deck. I'm just going to put it in the C tier. All right, next up, we've got Rock Lock. This is a deck that I love. So Rock Lock, another deck that came over from 05 into 06. It combines Dark Tyranitar's Sand Damage Pokebody to put 1 damage counter on each of your opponent's benched basic Pokemon in between turns. And then Dark Ampharos's Pokebody puts 2 damage counters on your opponent's Pokemon whenever they evolve. So the idea here is a passive spread deck where you are loading up damage on your opponent's Pokemon via Tyranitar and Ampharos's Pokebodies, and then you devolve their board with Ancient Technical Machine Rock, which is one of my all-time favorite Pokemon TCG cards. I love Rock Lock. Here's what I have to say about Rock Lock. It's not the first stone generator that wins you the game, and it's not the second stone generator that wins you the game. It's that third time where you devolve their board and make them susceptible to Ampharos's Pokebody into Tyranitar's Pokebody. It's that third one that really is backbreaking and can win you the game. You have to be very patient when you play Rock Lock, and the deck does have some tough matchups, main one being that you are vulnerable to Battle Frontier. Turning off all of your bodies is tough. It's also a deck that relies on Pidgeot, so you do have to keep that in mind. However, I think Rock Lock is a deck that with the correct construction can do very well, and is a deck that I've had a lot of fun playing in the last half year or so. We saw some folks play it to Indianapolis 2024, where I believe Sky de la Cruz got 5th with Rock Lock, and I know we saw one other person have a pretty good run with Rock Lock as well. I think a second Rock Lock may have gotten top 8 at that tournament. So great deck. It's super fun. I'm going to put it in the B tier. Like I said, you're really vulnerable to Battle Frontier, and it is a deck full of stage 2s, and so you need to kind of get set up there. But Rock Lock is a super fun deck with a lot of really fun matchups. This is an amazing deck for casual play, and for competitive, I'm going to put Rock Lock in the B tier. Okay, next up, we have Nidoqueen. So, Nidoqueen from Fire Red and Leaf Green. Again, I'm talking about 2005 a lot here. It's because it did impact the 06 metagame. In 2005, this was a secret deck that exploded onto the scene at the World Championships, where Jeremy Marin won the 2005 Worlds with Nidoqueen, this rogue deck. Some other prominent players also played Nidoqueen, including Pablo Mesa and Adam Capriola. And Nidoqueen is an absolute force in 05, and it stays just as strong in 2006. So Nidoqueen is just a tank, and it relies on the fact that Toxic is an incredibly efficient attack. 1 energy, you poison them, and they take 2 damage in between turns. That seems really innocuous, but in practice, it builds up incredibly quickly. Another thing to remember is that in this format, Pokepowers are turned off by special conditions. So by using Toxic, you are not only loading up residual damage every turn, but you are preventing your opponent from using any relevant powers that their active Pokemon might have, all for 1 energy on a 120 HP 1 prize Pokemon. With Nidoqueen, your plan is to just stay back, rack up damage over time, and heal when you need to, and eventually you will attrition your opponent out of the game, and it does this incredibly well. I played Nidoqueen to the first 2006 tournament at Indianapolis Regionals 2024. I got top 8. I know that. So I think I got 6th or something. Nidoqueen is just so good. I had a lot of great games with it playing in that tournament. We saw other Nidoqueens do well as well. I think Val Kramer got top 4 with Nidoqueen on both days of the Indy Regionals tournaments, both day 1 and day 2. She got top 4. A lot of other folks played Nidoqueen as well that weekend. I think it was a really good choice for the metagame. Nidoqueen is just a super strong Pokemon. Again, it's really innocuous on the surface, but once you actually play against it, it is a force to be reckoned with. You pair it with Milotic for healing. You can pair it with Houndoom to item lock your opponent. You can pair it with Mr. Briny's Compassion to just keep looping and healing every turn. Scramble Energy gives this deck extra ability as well. You have access to stadiums like Desert Ruins. Nidoqueen is a very flexible, very strong card. I forgot to say, so Jeremy Marin won Worlds 2005 with Nidoqueen, came back to Worlds 2006 with Nidoqueen, only changed a handful of cards from his list, and got top 4 again at Worlds 2006. He got 3rd place with Nidoqueen as well. So back-to-back Worlds, top 4 finishes for this deck. It is phenomenal. It definitely belongs in A tier. All right, next up, we've got Bombtar. This is the combination of Spinning Tail, Dark Tyranitar, as well as Electrode EX. The goal of this deck is to dump energy into your discard pile, mainly Scramble energy, as well as Darkness energy and Heal energy. Sometimes Haul and FF if you want to get rid of your weakness. Dump them in the discard pile, and then use Electrode EX to blow up, attach the energy to Dark Tyranitar, make your opponent take prizes, which means 3 things. You will go down in prizes, so Scramble energy is activated. Additionally, you have access to POW Hand Extension and Rockets Admin. So you are loading up your board, you are activating one of the strongest trainers ever printed, and you get to use Rockets Admin to put your opponent's hand to a much smaller size. This deck is absurd. Dark Tyranitar is such an insane card that is statted for high energy costs, which are mitigated by Scramble energy and by Electrode EX. This was a strategy that was first implemented by Ross Cawthon at Worlds 2005, where he got 2nd place, losing to Jeremy Marin in the finals. Notably, Dark Tyranitar does have fighting weakness, which is part of why folks play Hall and FF or Protective Orb to get around that. But not everyone does. And in the 2006 format, it just got even better. At 2006 Worlds, we saw Sebastian Crema go undefeated in Swiss, a perfect 9-0, before losing in the top 32 of the tournament. I believe he lost to Chris Fulop's LBS, but I'm not 100% certain on that. And ever since then, Bombtar has just been an absolute wrecking ball in this format. The big issue with Bombtar in 2006 is that Electrode EX as a Pokemon has no counters. One of the things about the 2006 format is that any strategy you can think of has some type of counter. You have Battle Frontier, which turns off evolved colorless dark and metal Pokemon's Pokepowers and Pokebodies. You have Desert Ruins to attack EX Pokemon. Cursed Stone attacks Pokemon with Pokepowers. You have Lunatone and Solrock to shut off Pokepowers. You have Space Center to shut off Lunatone and Solrock. You have Pidgeot Delta, which turns off Pokepowers of non-Delta Pokemon. You have Latios and Latios Delta, which turn off Pokebodies of evolved Pokemon, etc., etc. I could go on and on. And yet, despite being a format with so many fine-tuned responses to other strategies, Electrode EX has none. Electrode EX cannot be power-locked by conventional means, although Pidgeot Delta, as I mentioned before, is one of the few cards that can lock Electrode EX. It dodges Desert Ruins, and Battle Frontier doesn't do anything to it. All you can do against Bombtar is attempt to knock out the Electrodes before they can use Extra Energy Bomb. However, this deck plays Swoop Teleporter, so your opponent can have a bench that consists of a Lunatone and a Solrock and a Jirachi and a Lapras, and then all of a sudden they go Swoop into Voltorb, evolve into Electrode EX, Extra Energy Bomb. So this deck has very, very, very few answers, even fewer if they do play responses to Fighting Weakness, which is one of its only counters. And overall, it is just an absolutely brutal deck. Once they go down in prizes, they can use Spinning Tail to stay behind in prizes and eventually wipe your whole board after several uses of Spinning Tail. Bombtar is the best deck in the format in RS to PK. It is probably the best deck in the format in 2005, although possibly Nidoqueen is better since I don't know of any ways to get rid of Dark Tyranitar's weakness in 2005. In 2006, Bombtar is a double S tier deck. It is one of the big 3, but due to the fact that there are no hard counters to Electrode EX in this format, for the most part, Bombtar just gets to execute its strategy and just make its opponent watch as they go off and hope that they can somehow knock you down before you go off. Bombtar is one of the strongest decks to ever be printed in the Pokemon trading card game, and in the 2006 format, it is a double S tier deck. Bombtar lives on top. It will probably forever live on top. I don't know how we will ever figure out a way to beat this deck in 2006. Now, I don't want to sit here and make it sound like I'm spouting doom and gloom. Bombtar is an interesting deck to play against. It's interesting to see be performed. Just because it has an ideal win condition doesn't mean it can always be pulled off. The biggest downside to Bombtar is getting energy in your discard pile, getting your Tyranitar set up in time, and being able to provide some semblance of early game pressure before you can get knocked down too quickly. When I was playing in the 2018 NEIC tournament, one of the ways that I beat Bombtar was by just rushing it down with a Lunatone's Target Beam. They weren't able to get Weakness Guard up in time, and so I was just able to knock them down one after the other after the other. I had mentioned Flariados is really strong into the deck because you can do insane amounts of damage with Reactive Poison, as well as being able to go around your opponent's board with Spider Trap, ignore the Tyranitar wearing big energy, and move elsewhere. So Bombtar is beatable. It's not a unbeatable monstrosity. However, it is by far the best deck in the format, and it just lies above the other decks in S tier. Speaking of the other decks in S tier, let's go ahead and round out the S tier with LBS, one of the most iconic decks of all time. No matter how much or how little you know about retro Pokemon TCG, the odds are very likely you have heard of LBS, or BLS as it is called on its Worlds deck that was printed in 2006. LBS combines the Pokemon of Lugia EX, Blastoise EX, and Steelix EX. Blastoise EX with Energy Rain lets you attach any number of water energy from your hand to your Pokemon and put 1 damage counter on them per energy. You then get to attach Holland's Cast Form, or Holland's Magneton, or Holland's Electrode. These are Pokemon that act as double rainbow energies when attached. When you attach them, you must bounce the energy back to your hand. So the combo is that you Energy Rain a water, your attach for turn is your Cast Form, and then you Energy Rain the water back. By accelerating energy this quickly and having access to all colors of energy, you have access to some of the most efficient and most brutally powerful Pokemon in the entire format. The main two being, of course, Lugia EX and Steelix EX. Lugia EX's Elemental Blast does a mind-boggling 200 damage, which for an incredibly long time was the highest number ever printed on a Pokemon card's attack. Elemental Blast for 200 damage for 3 energy. That's all it takes. You can power that up with a single water and a single Holland's Cast Form. That's ridiculous. Additionally, you have access to Steelix EX, whose Mudslide attack lets you snipe any Pokemon on the board for 100 damage. Of course, there are many Pokemon with 100 fewer HP, but the big one in this format is Pidgeot. So Mudslide Pidgeot is a very common strategy with the deck as well. Steelix EX is my favorite of the two. I know Elemental Blast is crazy damage and Lugia EX is a beautiful card, but Steelix EX is a Pokemon that I just love to use. It has really high HP, which helps mitigate the damage that is given to you by Energy Rain. Recall, every time you attach a water, you take a damage. So one of the downsides of Lugia EX is that it only has 100 HP, which means that if you want to use Energy Rain, attach Energy Rain, it effectively takes 20 damage every single time you use this attack. Your opponent can attack it back. Lugia EX usually gets knocked out within 1 or 2 turns of being in the active, whereas Steelix EX is a lot more difficult to KO. Steelix EX is also fun for, I think, having the most energy symbols on the bottom of a card ever. 2 weaknesses, 2 resistances, and I believe it has a 5 energy retreat cost. It's really funny to look at, and Mudslide is a really strong attack. LBS is super good. It definitely belongs in the S tier and is a deck that is still seeing a lot of success to this day. We saw Chip Ritchie won the NEIC 2018-2006 tournament with LBS, going a perfect 6-0 at the Indianapolis tournaments. In day 1, Jake Blandina got second with his own LBS, and in day 2, I believe Cole Stellato got top 8 with his LBS as well. So LBS is a deck that is still alive and well to this day. It is one of the most iconic decks in the format, and it is a deck that has fallen out of the RS to PK metagame, and is one of the reasons why I am comfortable saying that these two formats are so different. While Dragtrode and Bombtar certainly succeed as well in RS to PK, LBS has kind of become a lost art in that format. And so if you want to play a format where you get to play LBS and just attack with the most brutally powerful Pokemon ever printed in the format, come on over to 2006, try out LBS. It's iconic for a reason. It is such a cool deck, and it absolutely belongs in the S tier as the final member of this format's big three. Next up, we have Dustox EX. So Dustox EX is one of my favorite cards. I think it is so funny. It is an EX Pokemon with Safeguard. Remember that Safeguard is a Pokebody that prevents effects and damage from attacks of Pokemon EX. So it is an EX that is invincible to other EX Pokemon, and I think that is absolutely hilarious. The card is most often paired with Houndoom because you just load up a Dustox, you keep a low bench, you Houndoom to Trainer Lock and Stadium Lock your opponent. This deck does have access to Battlefront tier, so that is really strong as well. And then you disrupt your opponent while slowly whittling away. While Dustox has a really funny Pokebody, its attacks aren't amazing. Silverwind is 2 for 40, and then your attack next turn does 30 more damage. And then Cutting Wind is 3 for 70, and that's all you get. So you're required to 2-shot or even 3-shot most Pokemon in the format. But if you can pull it off, it's really fun. Dustox EX is just such a silly card, and I've always loved it from the moment I laid eyes on it. I want to give a special shout out to my friend Anthony Anderson, who decided to play Dustox Houndoom to the Indianapolis Regionals events. And I think he went 4-2 both times. So I think he got 10th place and then 9th place or something like that. He came really close both times. We actually paired up against each other, and he beat me with his Dustox. So, you know, it's not a terrible deck. With that said, I don't think Dustox Houndoom is a deck you probably should be playing in a tournament. It's super funny, and it's a deck I adore so much, and as badly as I want to put it in the C tier, I think I have to put Dustox Houndoom in the D tier. Unfortunately, it just doesn't do enough, and there are too many non-EX decks in this format. Dustox just has a tough time in the current metagame. I mean, Bombtar just pushes right through it. Dragtrode can attack around it, and Dark Dragonite resists grass. And then you have so many other big Pokemon in this format that are just non-EX that can give it a really hard time. So while Dustox tries its best, and I love it very much, I will be putting it in the D tier. I still love you, though. Safeguard on an EX is one of the funniest bits I've ever heard. Okay, next up here, we have Metanite. So this is the combination of Metagross Delta and Dragonite Delta. Metanite is such a cool deck. So Metagross has the attack Crush and Burn, which does 30 damage plus 20 for each energy you discard from your board. Dragonite Delta's Pokepower lets you attach lightning from your discard pile to itself, or to any Pokemon on your bench. So this is a type of deck that we have seen many times throughout the history of the Pokemon TCG. We have seen it quite recently with Flaffy from Evolving Skies. We've seen it with Electric from Noble Victories, I think is when it came out, or Emerging Powers, one of the two. And several other very similar effects throughout the game's history. Metanite is no exception. However, what makes Metanite so interesting is that this deck is super fast. Delta control off Metagross, look at the top 4 cards of your deck, put 1 into your hand, the other 3 on the bottom, is incredibly strong. Because Rare Candy is fast in this format, you have the ability to get set up and attacking as early as turn 2. And when Metanite goes off, it can just completely overrun its opponent. We saw Yuta Kamatsuda, the 2010 world champion, get 4th place at Worlds 2006 with Metanite. And yeah, it's a great deck. This is a really good deck to show to beginners because it's very fast and it has a very straightforward premise. You still get to do a lot of interesting things with Metanite. There are kind of 2 different types of variations folks typically play. So you have the Yuta Kamatsuda version, which is just pure turbo by playing Holland Ruins and Jirachi and Metal Call Beldum and just go, go, go. On the other side, you have the version of Metanite that the Nance brothers played to 2006 Worlds that features the Delta species Pokemon. It uses Holland Cast Form to draw with Delta Draw. And then one of the coolest techs ever is Mewtwo Delta species with Rayquaza Star. So the idea is that you would load up energy onto your board with Dragonite Delta, and then once you're ready, you bench Rayquaza Star, and then you bench Mewtwo Delta species to move all the energy over to Rayquaza Star, attach an Electrode or a Cast Form to give it Rainbow, and then you can attack with Holy Star to do 100 damage to all of your opponent's EX Pokemon. It is so cool, and Very interesting to see. One of the Nance brothers got top 16 at Worlds 2006 with this variant. Famously, they lost to Jeremy Marin in top 16 because the deck opted to play Fluffy Berry as its switching effect instead of an actual switch card. Fluffy Berry is a tool that gives you free retreat. So the problem is, because the deck played no actual switching effects and only played Fluffy Berry, Jeremy noticed this. And so, in the final game of the match, his opponent had a Cast Form active. Cast Form does no damage. And Jeremy Marin promoted a Pidgey and used Corner to prevent Cast Form from ever retreating. And his opponent was unable to escape the retreat lock and decked out. This is a very fascinating story, one of the most legendary stories I've ever heard in Retro. And additionally, its effects are felt to this day. Always make sure that you have some sort of switching out effect in your deck. That way you are not vulnerable to retreat lock. Especially in this format, Pidgey is so ubiquitous that Corner and Clutch are super easy attacks to use. And it's also a reminder that should you choose to play the Nance version of Metanite, which is a very cool deck, if you want to go check out their list and use it as a foundation, make sure you put an actual switching card in the deck, whether that's a Warp Energy or a Swoop Teleporter could even help you out there, or a Warp Point. Have some way to break out of the Corner lock. With that said, I rank Metanite in the A tier. Metanite is a phenomenal deck. It's super easy to pick up and learn if you're just starting out 2006. It's fast and it does high damage. Now, it is extremely vulnerable to Battle Frontier because it does have Delta species Pokemon, so it uses evolved metal Pokepowers. So your deck is extremely vulnerable to Battle Frontier. That's probably the worst thing about the deck. And you can sputter out if things don't get set up properly. You have to make sure to manage your resources carefully. I've also seen a lot of players deck themselves out because they go too fast and they draw too many cards, and all of a sudden they don't have enough time to actually convert. On the flip side, while you also have access to big damage, one of the best plays that Metanite can make is to use Pokemon Reversal to drag up a Pidgeot and then Crush and Burn, only discarding 1 energy. Because Metagross is also a lightning type, you'll be doing 50 times 2, which is 100, and you knock out the Pidgeot. So, very cool deck, and it belongs in the A tier. Okay, next up we have Eeveelutions. So I'm going to be using this Jolteon EX here to represent Eeveelutions. Eeveelutions is the creation of Jimmy Ballard. It is a combination of Pidgeot from Fire Red and Leaf Green, as well as a whole bunch of different of the Eeveelution EXs. You should go read all of them. They are all really strong cards in their own right. The strategy of the deck was to mainly combine Clutch from Pidgeot with these various effects on Eeveelutions to manipulate your opponent's board and eventually overrun them. Jimmy Ballard got second at Worlds 2006 with this deck, only losing to Jason Klaczynski in the finals. So this deck has seen success. With that said, if your name is not Jimmy Ballard, I do not recommend playing Eeveelutions. Jimmy loves to bring this deck to any tournament he is at, and I'm always happy to play with him. If you ever find him and you offer him a game of 06, he will likely be playing this deck. And watching Jimmy play this deck is unlike anything else. You can tell that he still knows this deck just as well as he did 19 years ago, and he can play it very well. However, if your name is not Jimmy Ballard, I don't really recommend playing this deck. I think that there are just other decks that are better out there. Unfortunately, the deck is kind of easy to play around. You just have to understand how to break through the Pidgeot, and ideally, you will want to be playing cards that can take out EX Pokemon as well, mainly cards such as Desert Ruins or Cursed Stone can give the deck a very hard time. I'm going to put Eeveelutions in the D tier. Again, Jimmy, I promise I'm not hating on the deck. I just think that if your name is not Jimmy Ballard, you probably should not be playing Eeveelutions. There's something else that's there for you, but try it out casually. It's so fascinating to actually put yourself behind the wheel of this deck and give it yourself a try. Next up, we have Jynx Lock. So this is a prototype to Mew Lock that we will see in a little bit. The idea is to use a plethora of control cards that are available to you in the Hidden Legends through Holland Phantom's card pool to lock down your opponent's board and prevent them from ever attacking you. You then use Jynx's Pure Power to load up damage on your opponent's board before eventually taking a single 4-prize turn with Pure Power, followed up by another Pure Power to take your last 2 prizes and win the game. So this is just a precursor to Mew Lock. So it does have some of its own differences to Mew Lock. But to be honest, I haven't really seen people play pure Jynx Lock recently. If you are trying to play the style of Lock deck, Mew Lock is pretty much the same deck, but using Mew-EX's Versatile to copy various attacks. And so I probably wouldn't play Jynx Lock over Mew Lock. I'm going to be putting Jynx Lock in the C tier. Just because you wouldn't play it doesn't make it a bad deck. There are still so many phenomenal control cards in this format, and you can use those to your advantage. It's just that Mew Lock is basically the same thing. So let's talk about Mew Lock. Like I said, the goal of Mew Lock is incredibly similar to the goal of Jynx Lock. You want to lock down your opponent's board and then copy Pure Power to wipe them out at the end of the game. So how do you do that? Well, by using Mew-EX's Versatile Pokebody, you have access to a plethora of phenomenal attacks. So the main attack you have access to is Minun from Deoxys' Sniff Out, which just says, put a card from your discard pile into your hand. The card that you are likely going to be looping over and over and over again is POW Hand Extension. As soon as your opponent takes a prize card, you get to use your POW to drag up one of your opponent's Pokemon on the bench, or to move energy off of their active Pokemon to one of their bench Pokemon and just prevent them from ever attacking you. You have access to plenty other locking attacks as well. One of the big ones is Unknown E, whose hidden power lets you look at your opponent's hand, put a basic Pokemon you find there onto their bench, and then move it active. Incredibly disruptive, and following along with the theme of making sure your opponent cannot attack. If Unknown E ever grabs a Haul and Cast form, for example, you're probably done. You have access to other locking effects as well, such as Wobbuffet, whose Pokebody increases the retreat cost of your opponent's active Pokemon, and again, just further increasing the lock. Now, at a point, some folks had theorized that in an untimed environment, Mew Lock was the best deck in the format, but in a timed environment, Mew Lock just doesn't have enough time to execute its lock before time runs out and the opponent wins on prizes. I would say nowadays, if Mew Lock does not have to deal with time, it is one of the best decks in the format. I don't know if I'd still call it the best deck in the format. I think if you are unprepared into Mew Lock, yes, you will almost certainly lose. However, if you do know how to play against Mew Lock and you are prepared, while it is still possible for your opponent to win, of course it does depend on effects such as Unknown E. It also depends on your opponent's draws as well. It is beatable. I don't think I would call it the absolute BDIF. In a timed environment, you do have to be careful. Play it at your own risk in a tournament. I'm not worried too much about the time aspect of it. In those tournaments, I watched Mew Lock typically execute its combo quickly enough, and I feel like if the lock is executed, I'm gonna concede. I'm not gonna try to cheese out on prizes if I know you would have won. I think Mew Lock is an A-tier deck in 2006. It's not very popular. Don't be surprised if you don't see folks really playing it. And if you do want to try to pick it up, it will take you quite a while to understand all of its intricacies. This is one of those control decks that's similar to Pidgeot control in today's meta, where you just have so many one-ofs and you have so many lines you have to understand and be able to follow and execute properly. But if you can do that, Mew Lock will be incredibly successful, and I'm going to put it in the A tier. All right, next up, we have Ludicargo. This is the combination of Ludicolo and Magcargo. So Ludicolo's Swing Dance lets you draw a card, and Magcargo's Smooth Over lets you put a card from your deck and stack it onto the top. So with this combination, you effectively get to search your deck for a card every single turn. And what makes this deck different from Pidgeot decks is that because you are not using Pidgeot, this deck does not rely on colorless evolved Pokepowers, so you get to play Battle Frontier. That's the main draw of Ludicargo, is its ability to search its deck for a card every single turn and deal big damage without being hindered by Battle Frontier, and thus being able to play it itself to lock its opponents. This is another deck that struggles mightily in RS to PK due to the presence of Cessation Crystal. Shutting off all Pokepowers from Cess Crystal means that Ludicargo kind of both has to deal with Cess on its own, and it doesn't really get as big of a benefit by getting to play Battle Frontier when Cess Crystal is already running around anyway. However, in 2006, it is a better deck. So the main attack is Circular Steps to do 10 damage for all Pokemon in play, excluding the Ludicolo that is attacking. And for 3 energy, you can power it up with a Scramble Energy or Double Rainbow and an attachment. This deck is great. I really enjoy it, and I have some friends that really love it as well. Shout out to my friend Kara Aquarin, who loves Ludicargo and loves Magcargo in particular. She's got a really cool Magcargo tattoo. I also want to shout out my friend Austin Waddle, who played Ludicargo to a top 8 finish at Indianapolis 2024 day 1. And then in day 2, he proceeded to make top cut, where he finished in 3rd place with Ludicargo. So congrats to him. It is a really cool deck, and it's really fun to watch in action. Ludicargo has a lot of really fun matchups to play casually as well. So if you're looking for some casual fun, I think Ludicargo is a must-build deck. I'm going to put it in the B tier. Some of the problems with Ludicargo include its extreme vulnerability to Cursed Stone, as well as any effects that heavily target Pokemon with Poke Powers. Additionally, the damage can be capped by your opponent just not benching as many Pokemon. Typically, this is risky in this format, but you usually are able to get around it. And then lastly, I think this deck has a pretty rough Bombtar matchup. So with that, all puts Ludicargo in the B tier, but it is a good deck. It's not a bad deck by any means, and it's one worth playing in 2006. All right, next up, we have Lunasol. So Lunatone Solrock. This is one of my favorite decks in 2006. It might be my favorite deck in the format. Lunasol is this very interesting, aggressive, low-to-the-ground deck where you only use basic Pokemon to have high HP and deal big damage, which is really rare for a deck that uses basic non-EX Pokemon. So how does it work? So Lunatone from Lunatone from Deoxys has 60 HP, and it has the target beam attack, which does 20 damage plus 10 for each Solrock you have in play. So 20 plus 10 for each one, caps out at 60 damage. Okay, so Solrock from Deoxys has a Pokebody that gives your Lunatone plus 20 HP. Actually, I think the way it's worded is that it has 80 base HP. So now your Lunatone has 80 HP. And then with an energy root, that gives you plus 20 HP. So now you are a 100 HP single prize basic Pokemon that's swinging for up to 60 damage, which can usually let you two-shot everything in the format. Of course, being a Lunatone and Solrock deck, you also have access to the Lunasol Lock. So Solrock shuts off Poke Powers from colorless Pokemon, and Lunatone, the other one from Legend Maker, turns off Poke Powers from Fire-type Pokemon. So you have access to the locking effects while you are also attacking in and having high HP and doing a lot of damage. I love this deck. It's just a whole lot of fun. It has a lot of vulnerabilities. Your HP isn't the highest, so you definitely can get washed out. Lunatone has water weakness, so speaking of getting washed out, it has a really hard time against Blastoise EX. Ludicargo is an interesting matchup. You would think that the water weakness would give Lunatone a hard time, and while it can, the fact that your own Lunatone from Legend Maker is shutting off Magcargo can spell trouble for Ludicargo. Another benefit of Lunasol is that it is immune to all 3 of the main stadiums. Desert Ruins, Cursed Stone, and Battle Frontier. It dodges all 3 of those, which also means that the deck can play all 3 of those. My personal list plays Cursed Stone and Battle Frontier. Miskasari, who won 2006 Worlds in the Seniors Division with Lunatone Solrock, played Cursed Stone and Desert Ruins. So you have access to every single stadium. Additionally, because this deck only plays 8 Pokemon, sometimes 9 if you play Girafarig like Miska did, then you have access to a lot of disruption cards that can fill out space in your deck. These are cards like Pokemon Reversal and Energy Removal too, to disrupt your opponent while swinging in for low energy, high damage attacks. The deck is also vulnerable to Giant Stump, so that reduces your board by a lot. Groudon EX does a similar thing. Additionally, as I mentioned before, Minun from Deoxys just obliterates the deck. 20 damage to everything with a Pokebody, well, that shreds through your board. The deck has a similar issue against Raichu Delta, so Zap will do 20 damage to all of the Pokemon on your board. The only good side is that Raichu has fighting weakness, so Lunatone can knock it out pretty easily. However, the damage can add up if your opponent is able to keep chaining Zaps every single turn until eventually running you over. So it's it's a deck with a lot of polarizing matchups. It can either win a lot or it can lose a lot, but I've had a ton of fun playing Lunatone Solrock throughout my years. I got 9th place at the NAIC 2018 tournament with Lunatone Solrock. I played it in day 2 of Indianapolis, where I completely busted out. I think I got one of the lowest places in the whole tournament. However, a different player won Indianapolis day 2 with Lunatone Solrock, and it was one of the more popular decks at that day. So, telling you, it's possible. There was also an online tournament that the PokeStats Discord had hosted, I believe in 2021 or 2022, where I got top 8 with Lunatone Solrock before losing in top 8 to Raichu Executor. So, very cool deck. I love it with all my heart. I would say it is probably my favorite deck in the 2006 format. However, because of its weird matchups and everything else going along with it, I will be putting Lunasol in the B tier, but I do love this deck very much. Do try it out. Okay, next up we have Machamp from Hidden Legends. So this is a friend that we know from the 2004 tier list, where I put it in the D tier. And now for the 2006 Metagame tier list, I will be putting Medicham in the D tier. I'm sorry, Machamp. It is the same problem that you had in 04. So Overzealous is cool, but you need your opponent to have EXs in order to pull that off. So what that means is that you're not going to get your increased damage against Bombtar. Dragtrode doesn't need to have EXs in play against Machamp. It can just wall with Dragtrode or with Dragonite, which also has fighting resistance. So it's double walling you in that regard. Decks like Nidoqueen and Metanite and Ludicargo and Rocklock and Lunasol, all these decks don't play EX Pokemon, so you're not getting through to them. And then Cross Chop is 4 energy and relies on a coin flip. The 2 reasons why I'm not putting Machamp in the F tier are Scramble Energy turns on Cross Chop and Brick Smash incredibly quickly, so you can Cross Chop with 2 energy attaches if one of them is a Scramble. And the other benefit is the fact that you are a fighting type, which does give you some of a chance against Bombtar, depending on whether they can get their weakness protection in place. If Bombtar gets a Hollow FF or a Protective Orb onto the Tyranitar, I think Machamp is going to have a really hard time. However, if they don't get the weakness guard, then your Machamp will be breaking through, and so you do have a pretty decent chance in that matchup. However, I think that's pretty much the only thing that Machamp from Hidden Legends does have going for it. I'm so sorry, buddy. I know you were D tier last time in 04, but I'm going to have to put it in the D tier again for 2006. It's not really a deck that I would recommend spending too much time on in general. However, I do think I could be proven wrong. If you can show me a really good list, I would love to see it and try it out. Let's see if we can finally break this card. All right, next up, we've got Medicham Houndoom. So this is one of the other main Medicham variants we see in this format, the first being Medicham Banette. So right away, I'll be putting Medicham Houndoom in the C tier. We have a pretty similar situation going on here. So again, Wise Aura, shutting off Poke Powers of non-EX Pokemon. So if your opponent's deck has non-EX Pokemon, such as Nidoqueen or Meta Knight or Ludicargo, you're shutting off those crucial powers, and you're going to have a good time against them. So the main goal, of course, is to use pure power to load up your opponent's board with a ton of damage before eventually wiping it out. By holding back on taking prize cards, you have access to crucial control cards such as POW Hand Extension. That is really the big one that helps out these decks like Medicham to do their thing. Additionally, Medicham Houndoom keeps a low bench in order to play Houndoom from Unseen Forces, which trainer locks your opponent if they have a bigger bench than you. So in theory, then, you are trainer locking them, you are controlling their board with POW Hand Extension, and you're loading up their board with pure power. You are not being attacked because you push them away with POW before taking all your prizes and winning the game. Additionally, Medicham EX is a fighting type, so once again, Sky Kick is one-shotting a Dark Tyranitar that does not have weakness protection. Although Wise Aura does not turn off Electrode EX, which means Bombtar will be allowed to blow up and activate its effects as well, you do have a fleeting chance against Bombtar if it does not play fighting weakness protection, such as Protective Orb or Holland FF. What are the downsides of Medicham? So as I mentioned, decks like LBS just don't really care about Medicham, although Houndoom does put in work, and that does give Medicham Houndoom a chance. It's not an auto loss. Wise Aura just isn't as effective in this format as we've seen in previous formats, and so you want some sort of help alongside Medicham. Another way that I've seen people play Medicham with Houndoom is also with Eeveelutions. So the main ones being Umbreon EX and Espeon EX. So Espeon EX devolves one of your opponent's benched Pokemon, and Umbreon EX gets to drag one of your opponent's Pokemon into the active. So there are ways to play around with Medicham, and I do think that it does have enough going for it that it is viable. I'm not going to be putting it in the D or F tier. However, picking the right list and then getting the right metagame for that list is a pretty tough challenge for Medicham to cross, and so I will be putting Medicham in the C tier. But this is another one of those decks that you really could, I think you could break it, find the right list, and you might be doing pretty well. All right, next up, we've got Mewtric. So this is Mew EX with Metric EX. Metric EX with the Disconnect attack for 40 damage. Prevent your opponent from playing any non-supporter trainers during their next turn. So that's items and stadiums. You get to use Mew EX to copy the attack. The main benefit of this is that you have Electrike with Recharge, so you can start with a Mew EX active with high HP, you can attach an energy, you can use Versatile to copy Electrike to attach another energy, and then immediately next turn evolve into Metric EX and get a turn 2 Disconnect. There are videos on my channel of me playing against Mewtric with LBS. You can see it in action and see what it looks like. Once Mewtric starts locking you, they will use Battle Frontier or Curse Stone to lock in the stadium, whichever stadium hurts your deck the most, while continuing to lock you every turn. The deck has access to Mega Shot to deal big damage to one of your Pokemon on the bench, and you have access to any plethora of control cards. You have Minun, you have Roselia. I used to play Rayquaza Star in my Mewtric list as well to give you a better shot against decks like Dragtrode. Overall, just an incredibly versatile deck, and Mewtric is very strong. So Mewtric won the 2006 World Championships. Jason Klaczynski piloted it to a finish. Additionally, I believe Mewtric is the only deck in the top 8 of 06 Worlds that had multiple entries. Eric Craig also got top 8 at Worlds with Mewtric as well. This deck is really strong. I will be putting Mewtric in the A tier. It is a very strong deck. It is very capable of just going turn 2 Disconnect, shake my hand. That's just how some of the games go with it. We saw Mewtric was one of the more popular decks on both days of the Indianapolis 2024 tournaments. One reason for that is that the Indy tournament was proxies not allowed. Proxies were banned. However, World Championship and foreign language cards were allowed. And so although people could not use proxies, which 2006 is unfortunately a prohibitively expensive format to build in paper with real cards. I will always encourage the use of proxies. I believe that they are only beneficial to the growth of retro and to allowing us to enjoy the game the way it should be. With that said, because proxies were not allowed at the Indianapolis tournament, folks were playing a lot of World Championship decks that were printed in the World's decks back in 2006, and Mewtric is one of the more common of those decks and one of the easiest to acquire, and so we saw Mewtric was pretty popular in both of those tournaments. It did okay. I think we may have had a Mewtric at top 8 in one of them, but we saw a lot of Mewtrics as well not succeed. However, I will acknowledge there were a lot of weird factors going on for that specific metagame. I don't blame it on the deck itself. I do think Mewtric is an A-tier deck. It is incredibly solid. It's a little annoying to play against, but I cannot deny that it is really strong. Putting it in A-tier, you should definitely feel okay bringing a Mewtric to a tournament. Next up, we've got Meganium. So think of Meganium as LBS's little sister. So with Meganium, you have a very similar strategy to LBS, where you're going to be using Meganium's Nurture and Heal Pokebody to accelerate energy onto your board, which will then allow you to power up attackers such as Steelix EX and Latios Star. There are two major downsides to Meganium compared to Blastoise. The most significant is the fact that Meganium is a once per turn effect. You're only accelerating 1 energy per Meganium, while Blastoise accelerates any number of energy. This means that the deck is a lot slower. If you want to attach 2 energy per turn, which is necessary to power up a Steelix in a single turn, or a Latios in a single turn, you will need 2 Meganium in play, which can be easier said than done. The other downside to Meganium is that because you use grass energy instead of water, you do not have access to Lugia EX. You could try to play it, but that would require 2 of your Rainbow Energy Pokemon to even attack with Lugia EX, since Elemental Blast is a water, a lightning, and a fire. So those are 2 major downsides. What even is the upside? Objectively, there is one huge upside to Meganium over LBS, which is Latios Star. So LBS plays Latios Star, which is 50 damage plus 100 to a defending Pokemon EX, while Latios Star is 50 damage plus 100 to a defending Stage 2 Pokemon. In this metagame, I personally think that Latios Star is just a better Pokemon than Latios Star. Many of the relevant EXs in the format are already Stage 2s, whereas there are several Stage 2 Pokemon that are difficult to break through without using Latios. In particular, Pokemon like Dark Tyranitar, where you can one-shot it with a Latios Star, and that's incredibly effective when Dark Tyranitar likes to rely on the fact that 120 HP is a lot. Additionally, you're one-shotting Nidoqueen and Metagross Delta and Dark Tyranitar and Dark Ampharos and Ludicargo and Machamp, etc., etc. Blastoise EX, right? Even the EXs as well can be Stage 2s. So I just think Latios is a more versatile attacker overall and is a lot more valuable to you in a deck. However, I cannot deny that Meganium is unfortunately just a lot slower and a bit more challenging than LBS. With that said, I do think the decks have their own differences. Meganium is a ton of fun. I am not going to be putting it in the D tier. However, I will be comfortably placing Meganium in the C tier. If you want to play it in a tournament, you're probably just better off playing LBS. But it does have its own unique aspects, and if those appeal to you, I will not be stopping you. I love Meganium. It's a deck I have been trying out pretty recently. I recently have switched around my list. I added a Regirock EX, which I found really helped out, give the deck some raw firepower, and I've had a lot of fun playing with it. So while I am going to put it in the C tier, Meganium EX is a very fun deck. Meganium, very cute Pokemon, very cute card art, and I will be placing it in the C tier. Check it out if you want. Very cool deck. All right, next up, we've got Politoed Stall. So this is a fun deck with Politoed EX. Politoed EX with 3 very fascinating attacks. The main one for this deck is the second attack, Punch and Run. For 3 energy, it does 40 damage, and you switch it into one of your bench Pokemon. The main idea behind this deck is that you play Fossil Pokemon to punch and then run into a Fossil. Remember that in this format, Fossil Pokemon do not give up prize cards when knocked out. So you're basically forcing your opponent to hit through 12 copies of Robo Substitute or Lily's Pokédoll, something to that effect. However, you have 2 additional attacks. Upward Lick is really strong. It does 30 damage to a Pokemon, and it can do 50 damage if they are, I think, a Stage 2? Something like that. Or an EX Pokemon, but it's a snipe. So it can hit anything on your opponent's board. And then Swallow Up is 4 for 70, and if the defending Pokemon has lower HP than you, then it does a ton of damage. I think it's 120. So Politoed is so cool. It's such a silly deck. It's so much fun. I think this is one of those decks that is just a blast. There is no way I could put it higher than C tier, and I do feel a little bit tempted to put it in the D tier, and I think there are others out there who would smash the D tier. They would tell you, do not play Politoed. But it's so fun, and people do lose to it, and I do think that it can be difficult to overcome. Unless your deck plays some sort of sniping effect, it can easily just hide on the bench and whittle you away with its punches and its runs. So I do think Politoed will be in the C tier, but I'll put it towards the bottom of the C tier. Such a fun deck. One of the most fun decks in the format. I think you have to try it if you want to play 06. Just keep in mind, it's not the best deck. It's not close to the best deck, but it's so cool. We have seen people attempt to play it in these tournaments. So my friend Ryan Ferry played Politoed both to NAIC 2018 as well as the Indianapolis tournaments. At NAIC 2018, I know that he went 4-2 with it, so there you go. I think he did a bit worse in Indianapolis, but that's okay. Very fun deck. Try it out. I'm going to be putting it in the C tier. All right, next up we have Raichu Delta and Exeggutor Delta, aka RaiEggs, aka Delta. I'd say this is also one of the most iconic decks in the format. When people think of retro, some people like to ask, oh, is that the RaiEggs format? That's something I hear quite a bit. So very iconic deck. This was a surprise deck that was piloted by Kyle Sukovich, Martin Moreno, and a few other players to US Nationals, where they ended up winning the tournament. I believe Moreno won US Nationals with Raichu Exeggutor. So this is a spread deck. Your two main attacks are Zap from Raichu Delta, which for 1 energy does 20 damage to all of your opponent's Pokemon with a Poke Power or Poke Body, as well as Exeggutor Delta's Split Bomb to do 30 damage to 2 of your opponent's Pokemon. This deck is a force to be reckoned with. The spread can be absolutely brutal. Even if you try to prepare your deck for it, sometimes your deck construction just necessitates that Zap is going to completely obliterate your board. RaiEggs has auto wins to quite a few of the decks on this page, and if not auto wins, you could just call them very good matchups. RaiEggs has a very good LBS matchup. It has a very good Dragtrode matchup. It has a very good Metanite matchup, a very good Ludicargo matchup, an amazing Lunasol matchup, etc., etc. If your deck has a lot of bench sitters that have powers or bodies, Raichu is coming for you. And wherever Raichu falls short, Exeggutor is there to fill in the gap. Exeggutor Delta, a phenomenal card. Both Delta Circle and Split Bomb are amazing attacks, and it can really shore up some of the downsides of Raichu Delta. With that said, you can tech for this deck. So while historically LBS struggles very hard against RaiEggs, one tech that we have seen pop up time and again is Regirock EX. This is a card that one-shots Raichu and it heals itself every turn to get around your spreading effects, and we have seen it time and time again be very effective against RaiEggs. Jay Hornung currently plays Regirock EX in his LBS list, which we then saw Jake Blandina get second with at Indianapolis. We even saw Jason Klaczynski's World's Winning List play a Regirock EX for the Raichu matchup. So even though he wasn't playing LBS, he still was scared enough of RaiEggs to want to play the Regirock EX. Like I mentioned, I play it in my Meganium deck, and there are other decks in this format that can easily slot in a Regirock as well. Additionally, you have Rhydon from Hidden Legends. When it is active, it prevents damage to your bench Pokemon. So that is the best of the bench barrier effects that we have in 2006. Remember that Doug Trio came out in Crystal Guardian, so we don't have access to that. But this is another way to stop the spreading effects of Raichu, and Rhydon also being a fighting type gives it a very good shot against Raichu as well. So it does have its counters. However, RaiEggs is a really strong deck. It's also a deck that has access to the big 3 stadiums. It can play any of them, and that's what also helps make it super deadly. RaiEggs is really good in RSPK, where it has access to Cessation Crystal. While we don't get that here, we do get our stadiums, and I do think that this is another deck whose lists could be improved a little bit. I'm trying out a version with POW Hand Extension that feels pretty good, and although I'm already putting in the A tier, I do think RaiEggs is one of those decks that you should always look out for and think about when you're playing 2006. I'm going to put it high up in the A tier. I think I will put it above Nidoqueen. RaiEggs is a really strong deck in 06 and is one that you really need to look out for. Okay, what we have right now on this tier list is more or less the canonical 2006 metagame that is most commonly played today in gauntlets and in tournaments. If you see a 2006 tournament happening it is incredibly likely that every deck in that tournament will be one of the decks that is listed on this tier list. However, I still have a few more decks that I want to talk about. I actually have 8 more decks I want to talk about. I want to start off with a few decks that were successful historically, however, are not decks that are played much anymore. The first up of these decks I want to discuss is Dark Slowking. Dark Slowking is an aggro deck that tries to use Litter on turn 2. Litter does 20 damage plus 30 damage for each Team Galactic's invention. Did I say Team Galactic's invention? That's funny. Litter is an attack that does 20 damage plus 30 damage for each Team Rocket's secret machine or whatever they call them that you discard from your hand. So with POW Hand Extension and Swoop Teleporter, as well as a few others, you can discard those cards and do a bunch of damage on turn 2, thanks to double Rainbow Energy, or by just a turn 1 attach into a turn 2 attach. So this is a super fast aggro deck. I want to shout out a good friend of mine, Adam Vernola, who won a regional in the 2006 season with Dark Slowking. Now, this was also a deck that we saw pop up in 2005. It's played in 2006. I think most people today write it off for just not being as good as they think it is. However, I think Dark Slowking is pretty good. Speaking of Adam, I've played against him while he was playing Dark Slowking, and we actually recorded a gameplay footage of us playing with Dark Slowking versus LBS back in 2022. Unfortunately, the footage ended up cutting off before the match could end. So I have never been able to fully upload that game. However, it was a really fun game. Let me put up some footage of it right here.
Machines too, POW, and Swoop.
Oh, this plays Jirachi.
You got the Jirachis.
Yeah. Forgot.
Alright. Can I attack?
Yeah.
Confusion Wave. Oh, you started Howl's Magnemite?
Yeah.
This is going to be a good game, Ella.
No. Let's go to game 2.
Come on, Swoop. Got it. Trigger. 1, 2, 3. Let's go back to the deck.
Do you have a search card?
Swoop. Discard.
Into
Slowpoke. I have a thing in my hand.
Do you have a Slowking in your hand?
I do.
That's a phenomenal play. Good job.
How much damage do I need to do? It's 40.
40.
Not very much. It's getting real thin there.
That's good. Look at that. Wow. Retriever is such a good card.
Keep it. What do I care? I want to go attach this turn. So we'll attach to Dark to Slowpoke. And then Litter.
And it goes to show that Dark Slowking is still really good. Additionally, I want to point out one thing that I think people forget about for Dark Slowking in this format in particular is that you also have access to Slowking from Unseen Forces, which is a phenomenal finisher in the deck. Once you start off aggressive by littering your cards away into the discard pile, you can then use Slowking from Unseen Forces to deal massive amounts of damage with all of the tools that have been piling up in your discard throughout the course of the game. So I think that really helps shore up the deck's late game and gives it a lot more firepower than you might expect. Dark and Psychic are good types to have in this format as well. They do a lot of damage and they have good weaknesses. So yeah, I think Dark Slowking is being slept on. I don't think it's amazing. I'm not going to put it above the C tier. However, I do think it does belong in a tournament. And if you're looking for a really aggressive deck to play in a tournament, look for Dark Slowking. I do think that it is worth trying out. And for that, I'm going to put it in the C tier. Next up is Mercury. So this is a deck featuring Gardevoir from Delta Species as well as Delta Species Staryu. So Staryu lets you search your deck for a metal energy and attach it to Staryu. It has metal navigation. And then you can use Gardevoir's energy jump to move the energy around your board. This is a deck that friend of the channel, Sable, really enjoys and I think may have helped kind of popularize it back in, 2016 or so. A long time ago now. And yeah, this is a cool deck. So you have Psychic Rage, you have Black Magic, you have a couple other attacks available to the deck as well. This is kind of a nice like Delta toolbox deck. I'm going to be putting Mercury in the C tier. Sable might be sad about this. Yeah, it's a deck that works. I've lost games to it. I've seen it pop off. However, it's never a deck that has particularly wowed me. I think every time I see Mercury be played, I'm kind of like, okay, yeah, it's Mercury. It's fine. But I'm never really scared of the deck. The deck is vulnerable to Battle Frontier by relying on evolved metal Pokemon powers. So that is one of the biggest issues with the deck. And even as you do get set up, I wish Staryu was just a better attacker. It can draw cards really well, but like its actual damage output isn't super high. So you're really relying on your Gardevoir. So with that, I'm going to be putting it in the C tier. Try it out. It's another fan favorite. I see people playing it on TCG1 every now and then. I think people want to make this deck work, and I think you'll have a good time with it. Maybe think about it a little bit before you play it in a tournament. But if you did play it in a tournament, I don't think you would necessarily bomb out. Speaking of decks and bombing out, I do think that if you play Kingdra Pidgeot, you will be bombing out of the tournament. Unfortunately, I am putting Kingdra from Delta Species into my F tier for this tier list. This is a deck that people play. We actually saw it be played at the Indianapolis 2006 tournament, and it also, for some reason, has a listing on PTCG Legends. I really do not believe in Kingdra Delta. Here's the problem with it. Kingdra Delta is a card that relies on your opponent having Delta Species Pokemon or EX Pokemon. When you first hear that, that doesn't sound so bad, because surely most of the metagame is either Delta Species or EX Pokemon, right? No, not really. If you take a look at this tier list so far, Bombtar does not have Electrode in the active, so the attack for Kingdra doesn't matter. Dragtrode, yes, you're increasing your damage, but only by 30, so you're still not one-shotting a Dark Sneasel. LBS is an EX-centric deck, that is true. However, it's not Delta, so Kingdra's Poke Power isn't doing anything, and you also can just attack with like a Sudowoodo or something, or a Latias Star, whatever you need to get through it. Also, you can just one-shot their board anyway, because Kingdra is not super high HP. RaiEggs is a Delta deck, so you do get to use Kingdra's Poke Power, but you're not going to be doing big damage with Extra Flame, so you'll have to rely on the second attack. However, I will give it some credit. The second attack does one-shot a Raichu or an Exeggutor, so that's probably one of its better matchups. However, it gets worse the further down the list we go. Nidoqueen doesn't do anything. You're getting run over by Nidoqueen. Metanite, again, it does have Delta Species Pokemon, so you can drop damage counters, but Metanite is one-shotting you anyway. Mew Lock doesn't care at all. Mew Lock is going to run over it, because one of the other big weaknesses of Kingdra Pidgeot is that it is susceptible to Battle Frontier. And for some reason, I don't think the lists online plays any stadium counters, which is like a terrible idea. So if you do want to try this card, make sure you play some stadium outs. Anyway, keep going down the list, keep looking at these decks. It just gets worse and worse for Kingdra. Kingdra Delta Species really is not it. And I actually think this might be the second time that I put a Kingdra deck in the F tier, which is really unfortunate because it's a cool Pokemon and it gets interesting cards. But Delta Species Pokemon are only take up like 2 or 3 sets in this format. There were 2 new in this metagame to really be relevant with Dragon Curse, which is Kingdra's Poke Power, and Extra Flame isn't doing a whole lot either, and then you need 4 energy to do 80 damage. So, and you're susceptible to Battle Frontier. I'm sorry, I think this card is just super uninspiring. It's not what I want in a deck. I don't think it's reliable. I would never, ever, ever seriously play Kingdra Pidgeot, whether casually or in a tournament. I'm so sorry, but you will be F tier. I've got 2 more decks that are technically historical. The first one is Froth. So this is a deck that relies on Azumarill, Team Rocket's Poke Power Froth, which says when you evolve into Azumarill, the defending Pokemon is paralyzed. You then use some sort of attacker that will Trainer Lock your opponent. So the particular list that I have in mind is the one that Chris Dozen played to Indianapolis 2024, where on the day 2 tournament, they got 2nd place with Froth. So me putting it in D tier maybe is already, breaking my own rules because it demonstrably has a 2nd place finish to a tournament. However, I will admit I did not get to watch Chris play too many of these games in action, but in practice, I think that while Crobat from Delta Species is strong, and of course it has Radar Jammer to pair well with Froth, I think Chris probably just had a really good metagame with the combination of players being unprepared. I think if you are unprepared against Froth, which I do think is part of what happened at that tournament, then yes, Froth will do well. However, I do think a prepared player will be capable of beating Froth. This goes back to what I was saying about the corner locking with the Pidgey and the Metanite deck that didn't play any switch outs. You have to keep these effects in mind, whether you're being retreat locked or paralyzed locked like Azumarill, and so just keep playing switching outs. Notably, if you play trainer-based switch outs, then the Crobat will turn it off. That is true. So you would need Warp Energy or something like that. However, it is possible to totally break through the lock, and then Froth isn't doing much damage, so it takes a really long time to get set up. However, I do want to give Chris credit. They ran through the tournament, and their list was played very well. They have a very interesting list as well. I think it played 4 copies of VS Seeker, which is something you never see in the EX era, and trying to loop Bryony every turn to loop these Azumarills. It's really cool. Props to Chris for doing well with the deck. Azumarill's cool. It's great to see. Very cute art as well. And Froth is a very interesting Poke Power that I think has intrigued many when they've read it. Speaking of Chris, one other deck that they have been playing recently is a deck featuring Gorebyss from Legend Maker, as well as Gorebyss from Hidden Legends. As you might remember from the 2004 tier list, Gorebyss from Hidden Legends is a card that is absolutely phenomenal in the 2004 format with its Mystic Water attack. However, the conditions for it got a lot worse after 2004 because the prevalence of Psychic-type energy went down, as well as the energy acceleration of everything else going up. With Gorebyss only having 70 HP, it's really tough for it to compete in this metagame. However, Chris may have found the answer. So, Gorebyss from Legend Maker turns your React energy into 2 energy of any type, and then Huntail, I believe, searches your deck for React Energy and attaches it to your Pokemon. So the idea here from Chris is to combine the Gorebyss from Legend Maker and the Huntail from Legend Maker to load up your board with energy to then attack with Gorebyss from Hidden Legends with Mystic Water. I will admit, this is not a deck that I have seen in action. It's a deck that I have been interested in testing, but I have yet to do so. On the surface, just theoretically thinking about the deck, I will be putting it in the D tier. I am worried that Gorebyss from Hidden Legends with Mystic Water just doesn't have a high enough damage output relative to its HP. I'm very worried for its HP. If I have to quickly brainstorm, I think that you would need to be playing Energy Root. You probably also should be playing like Battle Frontier or Curse Stone or Desert Ruins as well. So I would have to go back and look at Chris's list again to see if they play those cards, but I think that would be the bare minimum the card would need to succeed in the format. I do think it's possible. I would love to come back to this video in a year or 2 and ask myself, why did I ever put Gorebyss in the D tier? And it is a deck that I will be trying out eventually. At this time, I'm going to be putting it in the D tier, but I want to put it on this tier list to put it on everyone's radar. This could be a nice hidden deck that could slot in well into the 2006 metagame. Okay, lastly, I have 3 decks that we have seen succeed in the RS to PK metagame that could be translated into 2006. Although the 2006 meta has not seen a ton of innovation in the last half decade, RS to PK has exploded in popularity, and with that, its metagame has exploded with a lot of incredibly unique and creative ideas running around the format. Luckily, some of those ideas can be moved into 2006, and so I'd love to talk about 3 decks in particular that I think have a good shot at slotting into the 06 metagame. All right, first up is Quad Rayquaza. So this is a deck that uses Rayquaza from Holland Phantoms. It's kind of like a tank deck where you're using Delta Growth to just load up energy. You're giving it a bunch of special metals. You're giving it a bunch of Holland energy and all the effects that come with playing Holland energy with basic energy. And then the idea is that you will eventually use Swoop Teleporter to swoop into the Lightning type Rayquaza EX, just Lightning type Rayquaza Delta species, which does 10 damage for each energy attached to Rayquaza. So stall long enough to load up your big, massive Rayquaza, swoop into the other Rayquaza, and swing for big damage. We saw Vance Kelly get top 8 at one of the Stambler Opens with Quad Rayquaza. I think it has some other results as well in that format. So how does it look in 2006? Well, I'm going to be putting it in the D tier. There's one big concern I have for Quad Ray in this format, which is that in RS to PK, the deck depends on Cessation Crystal. That is how it can survive so long, by preventing its opponent from establishing a board state while it loads up its own. Once you eliminate Cess from the format, I think Quad Ray has a much harder time. The deck can play all of the big 3 stadiums. So it can play Battle Frontier, Cursed Stone, or Desert Ruins, which I think you would have to do. However, you would really be relying on those stadiums. Decks like LBS, for example, can just blast through your Rayquaza with a Lugia EX. Additionally, Rayquaza has colorless weakness, so I do think that can make it vulnerable to Pokemon like a Pidgeot. And then you have other Pokemon that can hit it for big damage as well. I'm just worried about its ability to set up in time before everything else can hit it quickly. 2006 is not a very fast format. However, I don't know if I'd say it's slow enough for a Rayquaza that doesn't have a Cess Crystal to keep up. Jay Hornung is the one who created this tier list, and he included this deck on his tier list, so I think he must see something in it, and I do think it's worth discussing, but for now, I think Quad Rayquaza will be going in my D tier. All right, next up is Pop. This deck is Fortress from Unseen Forces combined with Muck from Legend Maker. The idea here is that you are going to load up a Fortress with energy while stalling with a Muck active. Muck from Legend Maker's Poke Body turns off all powers from your opponent's board when it's active, straight up. It's even stronger than Medicham EX is. Additionally, then, you're loading up a Fortress on the back end before using Pop, which does 100 damage to your opponent's Pokemon. It does 70 damage to Fortress, which will effectively knock it out, and it lets you move your energy around the board. So you're going to use Pop to deal big damage, move the energy to your Fortress on the bench, which you can then either promote right away, or you can promote your Muck again, or Fossil to hide behind while you wait to use Pop again. The ultimate final end game of Pop is to set up a Registeel Star. Registeel Star's final laser puts 3 damage counters on your opponent's board in any way you like. However, if your opponent has 1 prize card left and you have no other Pokemon in play, it puts 6 damage counters on your opponent's board in any way you like. Now, that sounds not so great. However, keep in mind, this Registeel has ideally 4 special metal on it. And once it does, it can be incredibly difficult for your board to break through it before it just completely lasers out your board and wins the game. Credit to Tfue for creating this deck. He created it first in RS to PK, where he has succeeded. However, he has also converted the deck to 2006. I've played against his 06 Pop many times, and it is good. Even though this is a deck that nobody has ever seen be played in 06, and it's only a deck I've played against a handful of times on TCG1, I truly think this is a deck that could be viable in a tournament. I hesitate to put it anything above the C tier just because I do think it is unproven. I want to see Pop perform in tournaments before I'm willing to place it any higher. However, I am going to be putting it in the top of C tier, and I think of all of the interesting decks here, Pop has the most potential to shoot up these rankings. I think Tfue probably thinks that it is a very good deck. I think I've heard him even say that it's the best deck in the format, but he may have been joking. Maybe it's better than C tier. I'd love to see it be proven. If you're very interested in innovating the 06 metagame, Pop is a deck to look out for. Fortress of Unseen Forces, crazy deck, belongs in the C tier. I'm excited to see where it goes in the future. All right, the final deck I have for this tier list is Bombchamp. This is Electrode EX paired with Machamp from Legend Maker. This is another deck we've seen succeed in RSPK. We saw Canton Magic Hand win a major tournament with it. I think he won Stambler. Now, I don't play much RSPK. From what I've been told, the deck pretty much just acts as a Bombtar counter. With Swift Blow, you are one-shotting Tyrannitars, and even if they have a weakness guard set up, Swift Blow does 60 damage plus 20 for each react energy attached to Machamp, which means that you can effectively cap out at 140 damage with this Machamp. I myself have tried out Bombchamp in 06. I pretty much just took Canton's list and I changed up a couple things. I think I replaced copies of Windstorm with Desert Ruins, and I replaced a Mew Delta species with a Sudowoodo, which I think I then replaced with a 4th Machamp from Legend Maker. But I played this deck, and it wins. I'm, like, surprised that it wins. Again, it's not a deck that I am not sure that it's better than the C tier at this point. It's a deck I would need to see be played out more in other tournaments against other decks to see how it goes. But I have won games with Bombchamp in 06, and it is cool to see. Derail is a strong attack as well. And the nice thing about Bombchamp is that it's a bit more mid-range. Unlike Dark Tyranitar, where you really want to rush to an Electrode EX as soon as possible, Bombchamp is more than happy to use 1 or 2 Machamps before ever using Electrode. Using Swift Blow for even just 80 or 100 damage can be really effective. And then in the late game, you can finally use your Electrode to load up a last Machamp with all your React energy, hit them with an Admin and or a POW, and then go crazy and sweep them with massive damage Swift Blows to end the game. This deck absolutely has potential. And with that, I will also be putting it at the top of C tier alongside Pop. Maybe Bombchamp could go up to B tier one day, but I don't think I have enough information now to truly say that. Okay, this is my Worlds 2006 metagame tier list. So once again, we've got Bombtar in the double S tier. It's probably the single name I've said the most. It is the deck you must look out for with this format. The other members of the big three are Dragtrode and LBS, followed by the A tier of RaiEggs, Nidoqueen, Metanite, Mew Lock, and Mewtric. In the B tier, we've got Arcanine EX, Flariados, Lock, Ludicargo, and Lunasol. In the C tier, we've got Pop, Bombchamp, Banette Medicham, Jynx Lock, Medicham Houndoom, Dark Slowking, Meganium, Polistall, and Mercury. In the D tier, we've got Dustox Houndoom, Eeveelutions, Machamp Hidden Legends, Froth, Gorebyss, and Rayquaza. And in the F tier, we have Kingdra from Delta Species. Once again, 2006 is a phenomenal format. It is one of my favorites, and I love it to death. I cannot recommend playing this format enough. It is so much fun to play. It's also really fun to see and think about. I do have a few 2006 gameplay videos on my channel. In fact, some of the first videos on this channel are 2006 gameplay, so go and check that out if you want to hear me commentate some matches from 2017. Still at it here 8 years later, and I'm going to keep playing this format for decades more to come. Once again, RS to PK and 06, I think at this point they really are diverging. They are their own formats with their own pros and cons. If you like one, you should consider playing the other. And if you are an RSPK player who is interested in Worlds 2006, I hope this tier list helped illustrate some of the dynamics of this format, as well as some of the differences and the pros and cons to each. So I hope you enjoyed this tier list. It has been a pleasure to bring you on this journey with me. I love talking about these formats so much, and 2006 is one of these formats that is just belongs in the pantheon of retro formats. It is truly one of the greatest formats the TCG has ever had, and it is absolutely worth playing. Before I sign off, I want to thank you so much for all the support on my previous videos. As I'm recording this, my 2010 tier list has passed 2,000 views, which makes it far and away my most viewed video on this channel. It has been so much fun making these videos, and I'm so glad that you have been enjoying them as well. If you have not seen the other tier list videos, go ahead and check them out. I have them right here on the screen, as well as a playlist with all of my retro discussion videos, including these tier lists. Otherwise, thank you so much for watching. I hope you've had a great experience here. Let me know in the comments what you think about this tier list. Any decks I rated too high, anything I rated too low, anything you're surprised about, or anything I missed. Let me know. I love discussion. I'd love to hear from you. Otherwise, hope you've had a great time here. It has been a pleasure chatting with you, and have a great day.